A month ago, when I was here, I talked about the question that haunts me every time I drive onto the reservation. And the question that haunts me is, why did that first generation of Lummi Catholics accept the gospel? Why would they accept Christian teaching? Why is that something that they chose to do? And I mentioned that haunts me because there are so many people who reject Christianity because they see it as a colonial expression, as something that people only did out of naivety or out of ignorance. And I talked about how none of us think that the Lummi ancestors did that out of ignorance. How when they were accepting the gospel, there were very few, if any, white settlers in this area. And so it wasn't, as some tribes in the United States might have experienced, a social pressure or a negotiation with the people who were moving in. That somehow there was something inherent to Christianity that these folks saw and recognized as good and beautiful and something that they wanted. The definition of a change, after all, is it's getting rid of something that you had, or it's adopting something that you did not have. Now, after I talked about that, I had a couple people come up to me. Some members of the Jefferson family told me that the story that was handed down from them, from their elders to them, was that at some point, before there were any missionaries here, there was a figure who came in a canoe that paddled itself, and that this figure provided Christian teaching before the missionaries came, that there was this preparation for the coming of the missionaries. And then Clarence Bob told me a story that he got from his elders, which was the idea that there was a prophesier walking along the east shore, and at some point that prophesier stopped and pointed to Chuckanut Mountain and said, "Over that mountain is going to come a holy man." Now, I've been praying about these stories for a month. I've been asking, do they answer my question? And the conclusion I came to is they don't. They don't answer my question. Because what we're talking about is preparatory prophecy. This is the same thing that the Jews received. That's the entire story of the Old Testament. God is preparing people for the coming of Jesus. And these two stories are stories about the preparation for the coming of the faith. The preparation for the fullness of the faith. So the Old Testament, the Jews have this prophecy. These stories talk about the Lummi having some kind of equal preparation. And the reason it doesn't fully answer my question is because if you read the Bible in the Old Testament and the New, the Jewish people will reject Jesus, or at least the leaders at the time reject Jesus. They had been prepared for 1,500 years. They had been given every prophecy they could from these different prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and whatever else. And when Jesus comes on the scene, they say, that's not the guy. That's not who we were looking for. That's not what we think the Messiah is. And so even if there was preparation with the Lummi ancestors, they could easily have looked at Father Charus and said, yeah, that's not the guy. This isn't what we were waiting for. This isn't the guy that we wanted. Why did some people accept Jesus and some people not accept Jesus? Why did some Lummi ancestors believe that what Charus was preaching was the fulfillment of this preparation, and some did not? Why do some people today accept Catholicism as a valid expression and fulfillment of the wisdom of the Lummi ancestors, and some people reject it today as a colonial enterprise that cannot coexist with Indian culture? It's because at some point, the people who accept the gospel see that there is something powerful there, something that they need, something that they're lacking. This is what we hear in our gospel. Why would Jesus say that you are cursed? Woe to you if you are rich or filled, or you're laughing, or people speak well of you. Why would he say that that's a bad thing? That you would be in woe? He says it because those who in this life are rich and prosperous and filled and laughing and everybody speaks well of them, they are tempted to believe that they need nothing else, that they are just fine. And so they do not look to God for anything. If I have everything I need now, why do I need God? If I am just fine the way I am, why do I need salvation through Jesus Christ? Instead, blessed are those who are hungry and weeping, who are grieving. Blessed are those who are hated, because those people realize that their life is not complete without the Lord, that there is something else that they need. This is why I'm so desperate for the second coming, so that I can go up to Lummi Cemetery and I can sit with the elders and I can ask them questions. Because I want to know why or what they were looking for. There was preparation. Clarence also told me there's this letter from Father Charus where he talks about the Lummi being very spiritual people when he finds them. Right? There was preparation. And yet, there was something where they said, I need whatever's part of this gospel. There's something here that I need. And I want to know what it was. And I want to hear it from the mouths of the elders. And I will only once Christ comes and I can speak to them face to face. But what I do know is that I don't have the specific answer from their mouths and from their lives, but I have the general answer because it's the same for every culture who has ever said, we want the Christian gospel. It was the same for the Greeks, it was the same for the Jews, it was the same for the Romans, for the Celts, it was the same for the Visigoths, it was the same for the Chinese and the East Indians, it was the same for the Mixtecas in Mexico and the Incas in South America. In every case, what was missing, what they saw, what they experienced, and what they desired, and what caused them to give their life to Jesus in their own cultural context, in every case, it was grace. It was the power and it was the presence of God. And we can experience some aspect of God naturally through our experience of creation, through just living in this beautiful world that He's created. But the personal power and presence of God comes through Jesus Christ and comes through the sacraments. We experience Jesus directly and personally through baptism, the Eucharist, and confirmation. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a powerful thing. And when people are confronted with the power of God for the first time, it's very hard for them to turn away. Before Mass, in fact, Lucetta was telling me a story she just picked up from Jewel James, who carved the canoe out in our parking lot. And apparently the story there is that the two people in the canoe with, it's supposed to be Father Charus, I believe, with Father Charus, the man's name, the Anglicized man's name was David Crockett. He was a man, first generation of Lummi to accept the faith. He had 2 wives, and in order to be a Christian, you can't have 2 wives, right? That's against the gospel. So he made the very difficult sacrifice to say, okay, I will only live with one of them as my wife. And he and his wife would go down in a canoe to Tulalip to pick up Father Charus. They would canoe all the way down and they would canoe all the way back. That is an incredible sacrifice. And the only reason that sacrifice is made is because of grace. Because he experienced the power and the presence of God, and he wanted that power and presence here. And he went all the way to Tulalip in a canoe and back just to have Mass. Incredible. Why is this important today? It's not just a historical curiosity. I know that we all need Jesus. I need Jesus, my family needs Jesus, the kids I grew up with need Jesus, and we at Lummi need Jesus. Why? First reading. Jeremiah talks about the one who puts their trust in the Lord versus the one who puts their trust in human beings. And he says, the one who puts their trust in human beings is like a barren bush in the desert that enjoys no change of season but stands in a lava waste, a salt and empty earth. That image is powerful. Imagine a bush in a salt waste, in a lava waste. There's no soil, there's no nourishment, there's no water. That thing is going to dry up and die. That's what it's like to trust in human beings, to decide I only want to live by what I have as a human being, to live only naturally. But those who put their trust in God, who lives supernaturally, are like a tree planted beside the waters that stretches out its roots to the stream. It fears not the heat when it comes. Its leaves stay green. In the year of drought, it shows no distress, but still bears fruit. It's planted by the stream, receiving the water, receiving the nourishment. But notice, Jeremiah does not say that that tree will be without heat or drought. He says that that tree will be lively and green even with heat and drought. Now ask yourself, in every culture today, is there heat and drought? Kids I grew up with in South Seattle? Absolutely. Right? We talk about an epidemic of youth mental health, for example. Absolutely. Heat and drought. The resilience to this comes from the stream of the Lord's grace. The grace of Jesus through the sacraments, baptism, Eucharist, confirmation especially. The grace of Jesus allows us to endure even the hard times and even the drought. Now, ask yourself about your neighbors here at Lummi. Is there a drought? Are there struggles? Do we hear all the time about the absolute devastation that something like fentanyl is wreaking on our brothers and sisters? Do we hear all the time about people stuck in depression who can't even come out, who can't even engage in society? That's a drought. It's a heavy drought, and it is a heat. And I am absolutely convinced that the solution is the grace of Jesus Christ. I am absolutely convinced that even if there are natural issues to deal with, we talk about depression, sometimes there are natural explanations, that the supernatural grace of Jesus is what is going to make us resilient to that drought. That these trees will be green, and this will survive if we have the stream of grace. And that's why I keep asking that question. Why would people accept the gospel? Why would Lummi ancestors, if everything was perfect, if they were happy and fed and everybody spoke well of them, why would they accept a new gospel and bring that in to their culture and to their people? I think it's because they saw the power of grace. They saw the power of that stream. And they may have been prepared for it, but they didn't reject it when it came. They didn't say, I was waiting for a different gospel, because the power and grace of Jesus is so present, and it's so helpful. And everyone who accepts Jesus is like that tree next to the stream. The grace will get them through it. Whatever you're going through, whatever our people are going through, the more we give them Jesus, the more we can trust that they will survive and thrive.